Hey guys, you're listening to the most captivating podcast in iTunes. That's right, the Elite Man Podcast, where we turn average men into elite men every day. We interview the very best experts from the lifestyle, health, fitness, social, and even entrepreneurial worlds. And with their help, we give you some of the best advice on the planet. Subscribe now if you haven't already and enjoy the show. And oh yeah, if you really enjoy it, leave us a review. On today's episode number 203, entitled How to Master the Laws of Human Nature, I chat with Robert Greene. Robert Greene is a 6-time international best-selling author of The 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction, The 33 Strategies of War, The 50th Law, Mastery, and his latest book, The Laws of Human Nature. In today's episode, Robert discusses his latest book, detailing the 18 laws of human nature and the many lessons we can learn about ourselves and about others by examining our natural flaws and weaknesses. He talks about why these laws are so important, why we all have them, and how we can grow simply by recognizing their existence. Like Robert's fascinating books, this episode covers a myriad of historical figures and present-day celebrities and breaks down the ways the laws of human nature apply to them and what we can learn by studying them. If you're wondering how to master the laws of human nature found in all of us, check this episode out now. You are going to absolutely love it. And yes, if you haven't noticed, I am a little stuffed up, which is throwing off my voice a bit. I kind of sound a little weird, but as it happens, I'm actually just getting over a case of the mild flu, believe it or not, which actually is the 3rd year in a row, which I've been sick on my birthday, December 21st, and through Christmas. So if it happens again next year, I might actually have to start thinking that there's some kind of Stenstrom curse going on, but hopefully it is just a big coincidence and nothing more. But anyways, enjoy this fantastic episode with Robert Greene, and happy holidays. If you have not checked out our YouTube videos, go to elitemanmagazine.com/YouTube right now. Our YouTube channel just launched last week, and already the feedback has been phenomenal. Equal parts entertaining and informative, our YouTube videos will make you laugh, cry, smile, think, question, and celebrate the fantastic knowledge being bestowed to all. Every week we cover all your favorite topics and break down everything you need to know to be the best man you can be. Go to elitemanmagazine.com/YouTube right now to start viewing our videos. Make sure you like and leave a comment with your thoughts on each video too. It helps us out a ton and helps spread the message and grow our channel. Also, subscribe to our channel right now if you haven't yet. I promise you're going to love these videos and the ones we'll be releasing very soon. Subscribe and watch now at elitemanmagazine.com/YouTube. All right, guys, we're live. It's Justin Stenstrom from EliteManMagazine.com, and my guest today is the one and only Robert Greene, returning for the 2nd time on the Elite Man podcast, and we're going to talk today about his latest book, The Laws of Human Nature, and a phenomenal book. I'm about halfway through it. It's a lot longer, a lot thicker than some of the other books, but it's really great. It's phenomenal. I just started reading it a couple weeks back. Robert, thanks so much for joining us on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Even though you're a Celtics fan, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we go back and forth with that a little bit. You know, you guys got LeBron now. You're looking pretty good. I think the Celtics, I checked a couple days ago, I think they were in 4th or 5th place. So, you know, we got a bunch of new guys. We got Gordon Hayward coming back. He's trying to integrate himself into the offense, and you know, Kyrie playing with him, and you know, Kyrie was out the last couple months. So I think we're actually kind of in similar places, the Lakers and the Celtics right now, kind of getting things together and getting that chemistry going. What do you think?
I think the Celtics are probably a better team right now than the Lakers. I hate to admit it, but you're more of a complete team, and you're deeper, and I'm kind of surprised you haven't been doing better. But
yeah,
it's I say that with a lot of pain in me, and you know, I never like to admit that, but I think the Celtics could go to the championship this year if they start playing more, you know, better, and Hayward's starting to look good.
Yeah, you know, no, he is starting, and I think he's coming off the bench now, which is actually different for him, but it might be a better role. And you know what's funny too is we talked about this a minute ago, is like the Lakers, I mean, they got basically 3 guys all in the same type of position that are starters. I forget the other guy. You just said him a minute ago, the 2nd-year player there who's really good.
Kuzma.
Kuzma, and then Ingram and LeBron, and they're basically all wing guys, about 6'8" or so, give or take, and really fast, but also powerful. And but the point is they're all playing at the same time. Same Lakers. They got Hayward, they got Brown, they got
Tatum, yeah, exactly. I'm escaping my mind. The best player of all of them, Tatum, and they got these guys that are just playing basically the same positions. It's not center, forward, small forward anymore. It's like, just throw the best 5 guys out on the court and see what they do. And same thing with Golden State. It's been working the last few years in the league.
Yeah, that's the new trend.
I don't know what's up with that, but it's working, and I think there's something to it.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Hopefully, you guys don't do as well as I think you're going to do.
Same. I wish the same for the Celtics.
But no, best of luck to your team. I mean, you know what though? I do always love when it's a finals, the Celtics Lakers finals. Those are always the best to make for the best.
Well, we had the Red Sox Dodgers recently, and you guys won that one. That was pretty fun too.
Yeah. It's always interesting, man.
Yeah.
So, Robert, diving into the book, I think when we had you back the last time, it was Mastery that we talked about primarily.
That's right.
That was your last book.
Yeah.
This one took, how many years did this take to write?
Well, basically, probably more or less 5 years, give or take a few months. Yeah.
Okay. 5 years. I know this, like I said, this is a lot thicker than some of the, I mean, they're all actually pretty thick when it comes to self-help books, personal development type books. They're all very, very thick in that regard, but this is the thickest of all. And there's a lot more citations and historical examples and things like that, which is actually, I think, the best part of your writing. I like how you, and I've said this before, I like how you bring back some of these people from the past. And most people, a lot of these people that people have heard of, like historical figures that people have heard of, but not necessarily know their story or some of the ways that they can apply these laws into the time right now. And you're so good at intertwining that, past examples of people into present day life. And I want to dive into that in a second too, and kind of the research behind that. But first of all, what made you want to write this book? I mean, you wrote so many other books in the past, and why did this one come to mind? Why did the laws of human nature have to come about?
Well, several reasons. I've been studying people and psychology for 22 years, starting with the 48 Laws of Power, kind of focusing more on some of the darker aspects of human nature. And I've done consulting work during that time with a lot of very powerful people. And I noticed that the problems that a lot of people face in life is they may be really good at their job, they may really know their field, but they're really bad with people. They don't understand basic elements of psychology, what motivates human behavior. And because of this, they make terrible mistakes. I can't tell you how many times I've consulted with some CEO or very powerful person, and I'll be really surprised at the kind of problems that they have. They hired somebody to be their partner, their business partner. It ended up that person had a really bad character and is ruining their life. And it seemed kind of obvious to me, like, couldn't you see this coming? And so I had this idea, sort of probably while I was writing Mastery, that we're actually in some ways getting worse in social relationships. Maybe it has to do with how much time we spend on technology and how absorbed we become in our smartphones, and how bad we're becoming at actually observing the people that we're dealing with. But I've noticed more and more people coming to me with basic problems in just dealing with the people around them. Sometimes it's with a colleague or an intimate partner. Oftentimes it's with a very toxic type of personality. And so I had written a chapter in Mastery on social intelligence. And the idea was that, you could be really good at your craft, but if you're really bad at dealing with people, you'll kind of neutralize all of your technical brilliance. And people really kind of responded to that chapter, and they said, I want more, I want to know more. So I kind of wrote this book because I felt there was a deep need. And you commented on the thickness of the book, and I apologize for that. But I wanted it to be really comprehensive. You don't read the book cover to cover. You kind of pick and choose certain chapters that seem very relevant to the situation that you're in or to the people that you're dealing with. But I wanted to make it as complete as possible and to help my readers in as many areas as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, right, too. I think it's more of a book that, sort of like a compendium, I think is a good word of going back to. You read it once through, obviously, and you go back to it, reference it, and then you go back to certain chapters, certain laws, and can kind of pick and choose from that. That's the type of way I look at it anyways.
Yeah, that's right.
So what do you think the biggest takeaway is after writing the book and presenting it to the audience? What do you think the biggest thing that sticks out about the laws of human nature are? What is like the thing that, after writing it and doing all the research to it, that you think is probably the most important thing to know about, humans and interaction, socializing with them?
Well, it's to realize, there are many things I could say about that, but one thing I will say is to come to the realization that you really don't know yourself. You walk around with this kind of image of who you are, of what motivates your behavior, and why you choose certain things, why you choose this woman to be your partner, your intimate partner, whatever, why you chose this career, why you buy this product. And the more research I did, which was a lot of having to do with neuroscience and psychology, the more it became clear to me that so many of the things that motivate our behavior are things we never are aware of, we're very unconscious of. We make choices that often depend on things that happened to us in our childhood. We react to people. We react to authority figures based on relationships in our earliest years. We're extremely susceptible to the moods and emotions of people around us. We have this image of ourselves that we're very autonomous and independent, that when we choose to vote for a particular candidate or buy a product or leave our job and go somewhere else, that we are the ones controlling the shots, that we do this consciously and rationally. And my book is trying to show you that that's really not the case. Other forces within you are actually governing a lot of your behavior. So for instance, I have a chapter on envy, which is a very important theme in history. And the idea is that we humans are naturally continually comparing ourselves to other people and determining, does that other person have more? Are we getting cheated? Why don't we have what they have? And if you stop during the course of a day and thought of how many times you are actually comparing yourself to other people, that actually you are doing something or choosing something because other people are doing it, because you're afraid of missing out, or you hear about some trend, you'll start to realize how you're not nearly as autonomous as you thought you were. And so I call these forces that govern a lot of our behavior human nature. And it's my belief that if you become more aware of yourself and what is actually causing you to make these choices, you have a much better chance of being able to control it.
Yeah, no, that's big. What have you learned about yourself regarding human nature and some of your flaws, if you want to call them flaws, and how you get around that?
Well, that was a big revelation for me. I'm writing the book and I'm going very deep into it. And then, I'm writing a book on narcissism, for instance. And really, I come to the realization, kind of painful realization, that actually, Robert, you are a bit of a narcissist. You have this quality. I'm sitting here studying it and writing about how we all are self-absorbed and have this tendency. And I had to look and see this quality in myself. I wrote a chapter about the dark side of human nature, the shadow, the kind of qualities that we repress in ourselves. And I had to see that I have quite a bit of a shadow. I have very aggressive tendencies. I'm highly competitive. There is a kind of slightly, not violent, but sort of, there's a nasty side of me that I try to disguise. I realize that I too feel envy. So on and on and on, chapter after chapter, I had to come to the realization that I'm telling the reader, you are not exempt from these qualities. You have them just like everybody else. You have the potential to be aggressive, to feel envy, to be a narcissist. And I had to realize that it applies to me. And it was slightly painful.
So once you come up with that realization about yourself, the narcissism, the violent side of you, that dark side, the envious type of thing, what have you done, or how has your outlook changed? How have you improved your outlook on life and the way you perceive things and the way you think about yourself from that point forward after realizing that?
Well, it's sort of the effect that the book is supposed to have on the reader, and essentially, I'm more aware of it. So I'm not perfect. I'm very far from it, but I catch myself every now and then falling into the very kind of quality that I was sort of talking to the reader about. So now I'm aware when I feel more self-absorbed, when I am kind of becoming, less empathetic towards other people. I'm aware of these issues as they happen. If I said in the envy chapter that it's ridiculous to think you are not prone to this emotion, and I catch myself having it when I hear of other writers who've had incredible success with their book. I get that kind of pang of envy. Normally in the past, I never really dealt with it. I never really thought of it that way. I kind of do what other people do, which is not tell myself it's envy, but say, oh, that other person, they didn't deserve it. They shouldn't have had so much success. So now I'm much more aware of my own flaws, and I believe that's part of the process of beginning to overcome them and to control them to some degree.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the first part of the process of the whole picture really is the side of yourself, like working on yourself. When you become aware of these things in the moment and day-to-day life, is it like a stop and pause reflection type of thing, and then you sort of change your outlook and your thoughts and what you're thinking, or do you just kind of, just observe things and see where they take you?
Well, it is a process, and it requires baby steps. It's not like overnight you suddenly change who you are. I don't believe that. I think that's the problem with a lot of self-help books. I think the idea of trying to change and improve yourself is more difficult than we think, that we have patterns of behavior that we continually fall into. And so that if you really want to change yourself, you have to, it's slow, it takes time, and it takes patience. And it's little things. So half the time, half the course of the day, I will not recognize these sort of qualities as they operate in me. Only every now and then do I catch a glimpse of, these sides of my character. But those glimpses are enough to make me aware. And so then it sort of has a cascading effect. The more I think about something, the general idea in this book is start questioning why you feel a certain way. Start questioning why you reacted this way when somebody said this, why you reacted angrily on some social media thing and kind of blew up, why you bought this product, why are you attracted to this person. Don't accept everything that you do at face value and assume that you understand why you've made these choices. So I want you to stop in the course of the day and question yourself and look and try and figure out why you perhaps are making these choices. You'll discover that there's so many parts of your character that you really don't understand.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of interesting because I think people have depths to them and complexity that they're not even aware of.
Yeah, I took a acting class a few years back, and that reminds me of just like doing some of the routines, the rehearsals, the script reading, and that type of stuff, and then some improv, which we would do before some of the classes. It just brings out like a side of you that you're not aware of it that's really there. Like we have so many different facets to our personality, but we repress them in day-to-day life so much. But then you do something like a crazy acting class that gets you totally out of your element, right. And then you see like this, all these other sides to you that you don't even know exist. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, another kind of common example is we've all had the experience where when we're dealing with certain people that we know, we tend to react a certain way, but then when we encounter a different person, we react differently. So among friends, we kind of relax and we joke, and we have a certain personality that we assume. But then when we're with our boss, we don't act like we are with our friends. We become a different person. We wear a mask. We're much more careful and cautious what we say. We're a little bit intimidated. We're a little bit on our heels. So we change how we act depending on the people that we're interacting with. So if suddenly you were thrust into a different environment with very different people than you normally know, you would suddenly, like you did in your acting class, you would discover sides of your personality you never had realized existed before. Sort of our patterns and habits of life kind of dull us into thinking that we're this sort of simple person. But if you throw yourself into different circumstances, if you travel to an exotic country, if you date the kind of person you never dated before, you will suddenly see that you have you're a much more complete person than you had imagined.
Have you found a way in your research and your writing these books, have you found a way to optimize that type of role, that type of personality, that side to you that you want to bring out in favorable situations, say like, you're going into a job interview or even just day-to-day interactions with your boss as opposed to like your friends, and, bringing out the good sides of you that you have when you're with your friends, but in those meetings with your boss or interviews, etc.?
Well, I try to be practical, and I give an experiment that I think you can use on yourself as an example of what you're asking me. So if you notice yourself when you interact with your boss or a particular colleague, you always tend to react the same way. You get a little bit defensive, or because you like them, you kind of open up a little bit in front of them. It's always sort of the same thing. And I want you to play a little experiment with yourself. The next time you encounter this person, imagine that you're thinking of it in a different way. Imagine that you're thinking of that boss as if they were a friend, or as if they were somebody at a party that you knew. Someone that isn't so intimidating, that has, all these other issues or problems. Or this person that you kind of dislike in the office, for instance. Imagine perhaps for a moment why they might be kind of obnoxious. Perhaps there's something in their childhood or their parents, or that had a hard life, and try and understand. In other words, go to them in your encounter with them with a different mindset than you had before, feeling differently about them, and try to observe how they respond to you differently. So if you're simply thinking of them in a different way, they will catch this. They will respond to it in a kind of unconscious, pre-verbal way. And you will find them kind of reacting to you differently. So that person that you kind of dislike, if you sort of step back and say, I'm going to go see them and actively really try and act like I like them, make an effort, you will see that they will probably react to you in a way that is more positive than normally. They won't get so defensive in your presence. These are little experiments you can play on yourself, where you try and feel something differently in a situation and see how it changes the dynamic, So you're kind of an experimenter in the social realm. You have sort of fun with it. You're trying to play different roles and see what happens when you try on this different mask with somebody, sort of almost like in your acting class.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of similar to, I got my whole background in starting this was a dating coach many years back, and, you're very familiar with this, the Art of Seduction, all the psychology and everything that goes into that, and meeting women to be more attractive, and it kind of reminds me of that too, with you trying different things, especially when you first start getting better with women and being able to attract them and date them. It's like you try on like these little things, and you wear these different hats to see what fits you, and you're trying these different psychological principles and maybe even like some pickup lines or routines that they recommend. And a lot of it doesn't stick, but some of it does. And you're just going out there experimenting, being a social experimenter, and figuring out like, what's going to work for you, what's not. And then, that way you're more successful. You can kind of weed out the crap and stick with the good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, on the level of seduction, it's the degree of how relaxed and secure you feel about yourself has an eminently powerful effect on the other person that you're trying to seduce. Now, that's not sometimes easy to control. Sometimes it's hard to feel secure and to feel relaxed. But the more you practice it and the more you try it, and sometimes you even just have to play a game with yourself, just sort of imagining that you feel secure and relaxed, even though deep down inside you're kind of quaking in your shoes, trying these different things out. But, that's sort of the fun element, I think, in playing some of these chapters that I have, looking at yourself and trying to sort of alter your behavior based on some experiments and testing that you do. But what you need is a little bit of distance from yourself. If you're always, it's one of the things I talk about in the introduction. If you're always worried what other people think of you, if you're continually insecure and imagining, do people like me or not like me, you never have distance enough from yourself to try these different things out. You're always sort of self-absorbed. And so you have to be able to get some distance and look at yourself almost as if you're looking at another person.
Yeah, it's pretty weird to think that way, but it's so true. You have to. It's almost like you have. It's. I mean, you can think of it even in terms of like a video game character. Like you're the character and you're playing it. You're the operator of it, but it's on the screen and it's a different type of person to separate you to see what's really going on, giving you kind of the overview of like the full picture. Otherwise, you're right into the game and you can't really see everything.
Right. That's right. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
So we got 18, or you put 18 laws in the book. Would you say that every person has some degree of every law and, all the laws of human nature? Is this a part of everybody, or do some people like lack some and, they obviously have some of the other ones?
No, it's my belief that we all have all of these qualities. Some of them are kind of latent and weak and we don't really see them very well. But, it's always a potential for each and every one of us. So I have a chapter on aggression, and I try and explain that human animal, from the very beginning, from our earliest years of evolution, we are an aggressive animal. We have great need to control our environment, and it is what has made this rather weak hominid animal, which can't really run as fast as a leopard and doesn't have any claws or anything, what made us the preeminent animal on the planet. We're very, very aggressive. And, you'll look at the people around you and you'll go, well, I know somebody who isn't really aggressive at all, and I know another person who's really, like a Donald Trump type. But even the mildest person has that aggressive energy, but they channel it in different ways. Some people become passive aggressive, and we all know those passive aggressive types among us. Other people turn their aggressiveness against themselves with self-loathing and self-doubt, and they I call it self-sabotage, where they sort of look at themselves as if they're not worthy, and that aggressive energy kind of turns against themselves. So I'm trying to say, you have it in you. You have this energy. Everyone has this potential. At some point, if you, the listener out there, were put in certain circumstances in which you felt your life was threatened or your livelihood was threatened, you could even turn quite violent if the circumstances were right. So we all carry this potential within us. And what we humans tend to do is we always say it's the other person who's aggressive. The other person is a narcissist. And I'm trying to say we all carry all of these qualities within us to some degree.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I just want to go over the 18 of them real quick, just so the listeners have them, and then we can obviously touch on a couple of them or a few of them if you want. But just real quick, the law of, so there's 18 laws, the law of, and then I'll say the word of what the law is. So it's the number one, starting with number one, the law of rationality. 2 is narcissism, role-playing, compulsive behavior, covetousness, short-sightedness, defensiveness, self-sabotage, repression, envy, grandiosity, gender rigidity, aimlessness, conformity, fickleness, aggression, generational myopia, and death denial. So, I mean, there's 18. There's just fascinating, too, that, by the way, I love the 18 laws. Each one of them is unique. It talks about, again, a historical example and then brings it back to the present time. What made you come up with the 18? Is there a significance to the number 18? And then also, kind of related to this, is it 18 laws that you've just experienced through the years of writing your other books and through life, or is it from reading past historical examples and reading stuff from history, and then you kind of formulate these laws?
Well, I try and it might be sort of grandiose, but I try and fancy myself as if I'm kind of taking all of the wisdom of the ages and sort of consolidating it into this definitive statement about what it means to be human. And My method is I do an incredible amount of research. I read over 300 books for this book. I read books on anthropology, archaeology, neuroscience, history, social trends, biology, lots of psychology, and lots of neuroscience, as well as I can't tell you how many biographies of people. And I take all of this incredible evidence and I see patterns of behavior. So, we talked about envy. I see examples of envy in the Bible, perhaps the oldest piece of literature that we have. So I know that this is a quality that existed a long time ago. I read books by anthropologists who talk about the tremendous problems of envy among indigenous cultures, among hunter-gatherers. So I know that I'm now dealing with something that's very ancient and very deeply rooted in humans. Even chimpanzees are prone to envy. Okay, all right, now I have a chapter. Then I have other patterns. Obviously, our denial of death is something very obvious. It's something that all of us can see. We created the notion of an afterlife in heaven to sort of get rid of the sting of being aware of our mortality. So, that's obviously a theme. On and on and on. When I started, I had about 26 or 27 laws, and slowly I weed them out because I think this isn't big enough to be an entire chapter. It's actually really more a part of something else. But I have to admit, Justin, this isn't science. I can't claim that I have scientifically deduced these 18 laws because some of them overlap. Irrationality and short-sightedness are quite related. And you can say the same about covetousness and envy. So it's not a science, and I'm not God, but it's as close as I can get to covering all of the aspects of human behavior that I think, affects each and every human.
No, I think you're dead on, and I think some of the other laws too from some of your past books and some of the main concepts of them also are within some of the 18 laws. Would you say so too?
Yeah, I try not to repeat, but certainly the law about human desire and covetousness is related to things in seduction, and some of the law on how to persuade and influence people is something very much in the 48 Laws and the Art of Seduction. The chapter on discovering your purpose in life and not being aimless is very much related to mastery. So there are, points that are common. I can't help that. But in some ways, I tried as hard as possible to cover new ground.
Have you joined the Elite Man newsletter yet? If not, get on it right now. Go to EliteManMagazine.com/newsletter and sign up to get special Elite Man content not seen nor heard anywhere else. Get all of our bonus podcast information, sneak peeks into upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes content, special offers, and exclusive Elite Man updates you won't find anywhere on the planet. I'm telling you, if you're not on our newsletter, you're missing out. Go to EliteManMagazine.com/newsletter and become a true member of the Elite Man community. I look forward to speaking to you soon. EliteManMagazine.com/newsletter.
I want to talk about a few of the laws and some of the historical figures that you mentioned in the book, some of the people that stick out. For some reason, the first guy that sticks out is Howard Hughes. What made you want to write about Howard Hughes and his compulsion and that kind of aspect to his life and personality?
Well, I found it fascinating. It was about the time when that movie came out. I think it's called The Aviator.
Yeah, good movie.
And, but there was sort of this myth of Howard Hughes that even I grew up with. Later on in life, he became very weird and strange and kind of died in this very mysterious manner. But generally, people thought he was this sort of genius who created this incredible business empire with airplanes, etc. And it was kind of fascinating to read this biography and to discover that, in fact, he was a terrible, terrible businessman, one of the worst. He inherited a very profitable company, the Hughes Tool Company, from his father. So he started in life already with a fair amount of money. And he ran that company into the ground. He had to get rid of it, and it got run by somebody else, and then it became profitable again. All of his aircraft businesses failed miserably until he sold them to somebody else. But what fascinated me was that time and again, people would hire him, or people would partner with him, or people would commission him to build some new airplane. And then they would discover, oh my God, this guy's insane. He's a micromanager. He has to oversee every single detail to the point of madness. He doesn't know how to organize himself. He doesn't know how to manage people. He hires the worst people around him. And you had clear signs of this all around. You had an entire history to read of these problems over and over and over again. And yet people would still fall for the myth of Howard Hughes. And so what fascinated me was this idea that a problem we humans have is that we don't judge people by what I call their character, by the patterns of behavior they display, by evidence of what they've done in the past. Instead, we are continually seduced by people's image, by their appearance, by their charisma, by the myths surrounding them. And then we discover, to our dismay, that the myth is totally unrealistic. And so I want you, instead of focusing on people's charm or reputation or charisma, to focus on their patterns of behavior, to focus on what they've done in the past, to see signs of who they are deep inside as opposed to the surfaces. And so Howard Hughes is kind of the icon of what happens to us when we judge people by their appearances.
That is fascinating. And yeah, for the longest time, I thought the same thing about Howard Hughes, and I think pretty much everybody else does too, that he was this genius billionaire type of guy and just did all kinds of great things because he was so smart and was a polymath of sorts and could do so much. But, I mean, was there any of that facade that was actually true? Was there any truth to some of those things?
The one true thing about him is that he was a very good designer. If he had stuck to just designing airplanes, he could be a genius. But the problem was he fancied himself a great film producer, who would make these revolutionary films. He fancied himself an incredible business mogul, even greater than his father, when he was terrible at dealing with people. But if he had just stuck to his strength, which was designing really interesting airplanes, he did have a kind of a genius for that, almost like a Tesla.
Okay.
But he wasn't satisfied with that. He thought of himself as being greater than that. And a lot of people have that problem. They think they have a skill, they have a talent, but they imagine that they are much more than that. I see a little bit of Howard Hughes in Elon Musk, I must say. And I've seen it in other CEOs that I've worked with, where they imagine that it's the chapter on grandiosity, really, where they imagine that anything they touch is amazing because they have the magic. And the thing with Howard Hughes is he wasn't aware of his own limitations, and neither were the people who hired him either. So it's really about not accepting people's appearances, but trying to look behind the facade they present and determine the strength or weakness of their character. What makes a strong character is a person who can adapt, who can take criticism, who can learn from their mistakes, who can work well with other people, and who can change, who can grow learn from their failures. That's signs of a strong character. Weak characters are insecure, can't take any kind of criticism, always think they're right. You want to judge people, particularly in the business realm, by their character and not by their appearances.
Was Howard Hughes, was he actually good with people, socializing and interacting with people, or was he poor with that? Because I remember later in the movie, and I think you alluded to it too, he became like this recluse and stayed home and was very eccentric. I think he had some kind of mental thing going on, mental disorder. But so was he good with people, or was it more of the fact that like his persona, his image of his past history of business and things, that was what really persuaded people to work with him? He had charm, and he had charisma, and people bought into that. He was kind of fearless. He was somebody who would fly a plane in circumstances that were very dangerous. He crashed all the time.
So he was kind of fearless. He was a maverick. He did things that no other people did. And so that kind of gave him this sort of aura and this charisma, which was fine. He was a good aviator. He was kind of fearless in some ways, but that did not make him a good business person, right? So, yeah, he later on was a recluse. He had he was a germaphobe, not unlike our president. And he withdrew for later in life, and he became very antisocial. But he wasn't terrible with people in a charm sense of way. But when it came to business, he had to control every single aspect of the business, and he wouldn't let people have any leeway. And that kind of, I think, makes for a very poor manager.
Yeah, you're right. I think the comparison with Elon Musk is very accurate as well. And I don't really know much about Elon Musk, and who knows about his personal life. But that interview we did with Joe Rogan a few months back, was kind of it was actually very interesting. But just his personality was very sort of awkward. He's obviously incredibly intelligent, like super intelligent. But I think his relatability to people and just like like you and I conversing right now, like normal people talking, there's something off about him. I don't know what it is exactly, but there's something different about him. And I think you're right. He does like so much that, he tries to be Superman, and maybe he'd be better off just kind of focusing on a couple things.
Well, he illustrates a lot of the laws in the book. He doesn't have much self-control. If somebody crosses him, he goes on some sort of Twitter rage spree, and his stock drops, and people start to wonder about him, or he smokes pot on Joe Rogan, or he tries to go save those kids trapped in a cave in Thailand in a very kind of arrogant and heavy-handed manner. He's not very self-aware, which is a problem that I find in a lot of people, powerful people, in a surprising fashion. He's not used to looking at himself. He thinks that everything he touches is great. And this could be his downfall. This could be his limitation.
How do you think that so many people that are like super successful like him and, some of the other billionaires that come to mind, why are they so, or how have they been so successful without being self-aware and actually knowing when they're messing up?
Well, to be an entrepreneur, to start a business takes a lot of guts, a lot of energy, a lot of self-belief. And that's sort of the typical entrepreneurial profile. And in doing that, you have to think you have to not listen to anybody who doubts you. You have to listen to your parents who say, don't take the family money and invest in this. You have to be really bold, and it's what leads you to be extremely successful. But then once you bring together a large company, or you've established it, that same skill that brought you to the top no longer works. You now have a publicly traded company, and you have investors on Wall Street to worry about. You now have, a board of directors. You now have thousands of people that are your employees that you have to manage. And you have to become almost a different person. You have to adapt and be fluid. And that's an extremely difficult quality for humans. I was on the board of directors for a company, American Apparel, and Dev Charney, whom I admire and was a friend of mine, he fits this paradigm. Incredibly brilliant entrepreneur who starts this enormous business with a lot of guts and bravado. But then once it's an enormous company with stores all around the world, all of those strengths that he had, not listening to people, not caring what they think about him, just bulldozing over them, made him a terrible manager of people. So everybody needs to know about these laws and needs to understand, what motivates people around them. So you can't bulldoze over people. You can't, repress their spirit. You can't simply assume that you're God and everything you do is right. You have to learn your own limitations, and you have to learn how to build relationships. That's what business is all about. So I'm kind of fascinated by a lot of powerful people who get to the top but aren't able to adapt. And I must say Machiavelli, who's kind of one of my great inspirations for my first book, it was one of his main points was that what brings you to the top isn't what leads you to have continued success. You have to learn to adapt to the times, to be fluid, to adapt to circumstances. And that's the downfall of 90% of leaders in the world.
Yeah, it's an ever-changing climate, and the more success you get, the more it changes. And you're so right. That's such a great point, though. That I didn't even really think of. But the thing that makes these people so successful and so great, the Elon Musks of the world, is really that narcissistic belief that they are the best and they can do everything, and they shut everybody else out, all the naysayers who tell them in the beginning that they can't. And then when they get to the top, it's like they still have that attitude, even though they need to dial it back and listen to a lot of their people on the board, like, for instance, you with American Apparel.
Yeah, I mean, as a counterexample, you could say Steve Jobs to some extent. He was not the best manager of people. He could be very brusque and rude, but he realized his limitations. He realized that he was mostly a visionary, that he had incredible ideas about the future of technology, and that he had to be able to delegate to certain other people to realize his vision. And he had to kind of come to terms that he alone could not run this incredibly expanding empire. And at some point, all of us have to come to terms with our limitations, no matter how successful we are. We have to realize that we only have so much energy. There's only so many things we're good at, and we have to find other people to help us who can cover some of our own weaknesses.
Yeah. Stalin is another guy that comes up in the book as well, and I believe he's in the narcissism chapter. What's the lesson that we can learn from Stalin?
Well, Stalin is a fascinating creature, probably the most evil man in the history of mankind. He's probably responsible for millions more deaths than even Adolf Hitler. But the thing about him is that people who are maniacal like that, who maybe we would say are psychopathic, are actually extremely intelligent and extremely in control of themselves and the situation. They're very, very dangerous. And narcissists, I make the point in this chapter, have a very particular relationship to other people around them. And you may have discovered this in your own life if you out there, listeners who've dealt with a narcissist. They don't see people around them as individuals. They see them as tools to be used, as extensions of themselves. In psychology, they call this the self-object. They see other people as actually a part of themselves that they can use for their own purposes, as tools. They don't have any empathy or any understanding of what makes the other person an individual. And so a psychopathic narcissist like Stalin, what's surprising about them and what's surprising about narcissists in general is that they do have charm. People are attracted to them. People give them power. Not to get political here, but I think we would all agree that our president is quite a narcissist. And yet he does have a certain charm for a lot of people. And it's not that they're so cold. They do understand people to some degree, but they understand people in order to use them. So someone like Trump sees the people around him as pawns that he can manipulate and use for his own effect. And this, you don't discover this right away when you go to work for someone like that, or you give them power. You think that they are charming because they're master manipulators. They know how to kind of flatter and appeal to people. And then once they have you in their grasp, they use you and they consume you and then they throw you away for their own purposes. So what fascinated me about Stalin is why someone so obviously evil was able to attract so much adoration from the people around him. And I think a lot of narcissists have that kind of perverse power. So I sort of wanted to explain that.
And going back to Trump for a second, and again, to stay, apolitical, but just observing him as a leader, a powerful person in the world, which he is, what about him separates, and what about someone like him, not even just specifically him, but someone like him, who we all, I mean, I can agree that he's a narcissist. You can agree that, and I think everyone listening can agree. What good, like him, good or bad, he has a lot of things that obviously are appealing to a lot of people, half the country. But he's a narcissist. But what about him specifically separates him that we can think of him as a narcissist as opposed to everybody having that narcissism characteristic in them? Because I think that's one of the points you make in the book, is that we all have narcissism in us. So what about someone like Trump separates him that we actually think of him as a narcissist?
Well, I call these types deep narcissists, and I create a kind of a visual analogy. I imagine looking at a scale of like 0 to 100, and 50 is sort of the middle zone, and the higher up you go on the scale, the more you're able to get outside of yourself and think of other people. The lower down on the scale, let's say 20 or 10, you're almost incapable of thinking about other people. You're so deeply self-absorbed, and you can never. So we all have moments where we go from maybe 60, where we're thinking about other people, where we go down to perhaps 40, below that midpoint, when we get very insecure, when we've lost our job, when we're facing adversity. We tend to become more self-absorbed, but then we rise back up. Deep narcissists are kind of locked below that point. They very rarely are able to rise high enough to get outside of themselves and think deeply about other people. And what happens with deep narcissists is they have some kind of terrible wound in their childhood, for instance, in which they don't develop a sense of self that they can love. I maintain all of us, when we were children, in moments of doubt or moments where we feared our parents didn't love us, which we all went through, we sort of turned inward and we created a sense of who we are, a kind of a self-esteem, so that in bad moments we could comfort ourselves. Deep narcissists lack that inner sense of self in order to be able to comfort themselves and feel comfortable and loved from within. And so what they must do is they must continually get attention and validation from other people. They can never get it from themselves. And so they're always needing other people to applaud them, to say that they're great, to stroke their ego. It's relentless. They cannot stop. It's an obsession. Well, that's Trump. He has to have the biggest inauguration audience ever. He has to be the most loved. He has to have the best deals. He has to be, everyone likes him more than, he's the greatest. He's had the greatest first months of any president ever. It always has to be the best, the best, the best. He needs continual validation from the crowd, from people, because there's sort of inner emptiness. He can't generate it from within. We can explain it from his childhood, from how hard his father was on him. We could maybe even understand it in his way. His father was trying to school him in the hard knocks of life in the business world, and was kind of cold and unfeeling, and supposedly his mother was a bit this way as well. I mean, there's a million ways we could try and approach why he's that way. But that's what defines the deep narcissist. They can never rise above that level to start thinking about other people as opposed outside of just what they need from them. So we see with Trump, he uses people for what he needs. In the moment that they're no longer useful, he's the meanest bastard in the world towards them, right? His relationship with General Kelly. In the beginning, he's the greatest general who ever lived. And now he's extremely cold because he doesn't have any need for him. He can't use him in any way. So he kind of fits the paradigm of the deep narcissist.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and especially looking at guys like Trump or Stalin or some of the other deep narcissist entrepreneurs and things of that nature. It's funny how they can. It's not funny. It's very interesting how they can turn on the charm and work the social systems, pull the levers to operate in their favor and just be so successful. But it's like, at the heart of it all, it's like they want all the glory. It's for selfish reasons. But I mean, I guess like you said, and I think it's in the book, we all have that to an extent. It's just that some of these people have it more than others. But do you think there's a difference between narcissism and sociopathic tendencies?
Well, I don't know exactly the definition, the dictionary definition of a sociopath. But clearly, I think all sociopaths would sort of fit into this deep narcissist pattern of behavior. There's a man that you can Google on YouTube. He's a fascinating man named Sam Vaknin. Don't know if you've heard of him. No. He's a man who diagnosed himself as a sociopath. He was sent to prison for various business crimes. And then he diagnosed himself as a raging narcissist, or what I call a deep narcissist. And he analyzed what it is that makes someone a sociopath, what makes them a narcissist. And he's very brilliant because he himself is one, and he clearly is, and you can see it even in his videos. There's something tweaked about the man. I recommend Googling him and looking up his videos because he's kind of fascinating. He's sort of one of the world's reigning experts in narcissism who diagnosed it in himself.
What's his name again? I'll put it in the show notes.
Sam Vaknin. I'm not exactly sure how you spell it. I can look it up.
Yeah, I'll make sure I add that in for sure, and that's fascinating. So is it something then, I mean, you said the thing with Trump, maybe it came from his father and being tough on him. Is it something do you think it's there's a genetic component to it, or do you think it's more of the way that we're grown up, the way we're raised when we're such a little kid, age 2, 3, 4, 5, that kind of age?
Certainly there must be a genetic component in which certain children have a much greater need for attention than others, and we see that in infants as early as 6 months old. They're crying for more attention than their siblings. There is something weirdly genetic about it, and I think there have been some psychoanalysts who've studied infants who've noted that. But then, of course, we have to say the incredibly important part that parenting plays in the development of these qualities. So if you don't comfort the child, if you're very cold, if you abandon it, or if you beat it, the child develops a very broken sense of self and can never develop that ability to rise up and not be buried in self-absorption. Think of it as a thermostat. When you have moments of doubt, your self-esteem kind of raises you up and makes you feel better. People from that background lack that. It also comes from parents who suffocate their children and don't allow them to develop their own identity. And their identity becomes completely tied in with their parents. And they go through life with this pattern of always having to find themselves through other people, through what they can get from other people. So there are different ways that will cause this paradigm of the deep narcissist. I can't exhaust them here. And, amazing books have been written about this subject. But essentially, there is usually some kind of break in early childhood. In the literature of Stalin, I've read probably 12 books on Stalin because he fascinates me. Some people say he had a happy childhood. Some people say he had a miserable childhood. But everyone agrees that his father beat him mercilessly and that his mother beat him as well. So I don't care, how positive, how loving it might have been. There's definitely some weird skeletons in the closet that formed his personality.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking about the parenting and that type of thing. Anton Chekhov comes to mind as well, and he's another example in the book with self-sabotage. And was there something with his father, too? His father was beating him, too, as well? And how did he learn from that?
I really liked this story because he's one of the main people in the book. He's a great, famous Russian writer, wrote plays and short stories. One of my favorite writers. But he grew up in the worst circumstances in this miserable little village in Russia called Taganrog that was very poor, very cold. People were kind of miserable. The only kind of playground in the whole city was in the town cemetery. His father, his family had been born serfs, which meant they were essentially slaves, but that had been freed maybe before, maybe 20, 30 years earlier. And his father had been forced to become a businessman in this town, even though the father fancied himself a musician. His father was really unhappy, and he beat Anton Chekhov almost every single day and never really explained why he was beating him. He would say, Anton, I'm doing this out of love because it's the only way that you're going to grow up to be a good boy. You have to be beaten. And he had to work at a very young age, and he had to deal with all of the town alcoholics. It was the worst kind of childhood you can imagine. And then on top of it all, when he was about 16, his entire family, his mother and father and siblings, basically abandoned him in this town to go live in Moscow. And he had to finish his education and try and earn a living and find a place to stay on his own. And he's only 16 with no money. And he's sitting there in this town, and at one point he has this sort of epiphany where he goes, I'm miserable. I hate my father. I hate my family. It's all I can think about night and day. And if this continues, I'm just going to become like my father. I'm going to become an alcoholic. I'm going to beat my own children. But there has to be a way out of this. And he decided that he would try to understand his father. He would take a step back and he would try and figure out why he was the way he was. And he went deeply into this, thinking about why he was so unhappy, what made him that way. And in that process, he came to accept his father and even love him. And then he went and did the same thing for his mother, and he accepted her. And he did the same thing for his other siblings. And he decided to look at the town of Taganrog not as this little miserable shithole town in Russia, but rather as this place with an incredible collection of characters that could serve as inspiration for short stories. And he sort of slowly realized that the difference wasn't, everything was the same. His father was still this bastard who beat him. His mother was still the same. The town was still miserable, but he changed his attitude. He saw that there was something else there. And it kind of was an incredible freedom to free himself, liberate himself from these negative, obsessive thoughts about his father. And it made him kind of suddenly extremely happy and not judgmental and accepting human nature and accepting people for who they are. And this carried on throughout his very short life because he died of tuberculosis. He went ahead and he tried to heal all of the wounds in his family by this kind of new love that he had developed for them. And I see Chekhov as sort of the paradigm for my book, that understanding people, understanding nature, and accepting them and accepting yourself can lead to some profound freedom. Because think of how, in the course of your day-to-day life, how many times your mind is churning around these negative thoughts about this person. They didn't say that. They didn't please me. They didn't return my email. Nah. All about what you're not getting. If you were free of those thoughts, you would suddenly have all this mental energy for solving problems, for creating a new business, for writing a novel. You'd feel so much happier about life in general. It's a power that you have. And it's a power I'm trying to steer you towards by learning about human nature and accepting it in people instead of always kind of complaining and judging.
Yeah, I think Chekhov's might be one of the most inspiring stories of all in all those examples in the book. It's really fascinating the way he was able to turn his life around just by changing his perspective on the way things are in his life currently, and you know how he was raised with his parents. And you know, it's just it's fascinating what you can do once you are able to step back and be more of an observer and not necessarily diving into accepting all these negative things that have come your way and dwelling on them.
Right.
Robert, one of the other things, too, that I wanted to bring up today is I believe it was the 18th law, the death denial.
Yeah.
You recently had a scare with your own health. I believe it was a stroke. Can you just talk about that for a moment and what you learned and how connected it was to actually that final chapter and one of the laws in the book and you know, experiencing that firsthand in your own life?
Well, it's kind of ironic. It's the last chapter in the book. I finish it, you know, like the middle of May, and then of this year, and then June, August. Like exactly 3 months later, I suffer a stroke in which it is basically a near-death experience. I nearly suffered permanent brain damage. I nearly got into perhaps a fatal car accident. I was driving at the time.
Wow.
But luckily, my wife was there, and she saw something severely wrong with me, and she called 911 right away and essentially saved me, you know, saved my brain, saved my life. So here I was writing a chapter about how you need to confront your mortality and accept it as part of life and open yourself, and not accepting your mortality frees you from all sorts of other fears, and it can become a beautiful philosophy. But writing that is kind of an intellectual exercise in some degree, because it's easy, Robert, for you to write that, but everybody is afraid of death. And so there's an element of, so what? It's easy to write those words. But then I had to literally confront it in my life. I had to literally deal with that. And so it was brought home to me in a much more real and visceral manner. And, I maintain in the chapter that being aware of your own mortality and seeing it in other people can make you much more empathetic. So if I look at you, Justin, and I realize that someday you are going to die just as certainly as I am, and I focus on that and I think deeply about it as I'm looking at you, it would be very hard to dislike you. I'd have to feel a degree of sympathy for you and empathy that you are going to have to face that one day, just as I will. So I wrote that in there. But now in the experiencing it firsthand, it suddenly was more than just this intellectual thing. I had to sort of feel this way. When you have a stroke, you lose all the power on the left side of your body, my left arm, my left leg, and you become weak and dependent. You become like a baby. Everybody has to do everything for you. And I'm somebody that likes to do everything for myself. And it made me kind of feel empathetic towards everybody in the world who has these feelings of helplessness, that has this kind of vulnerability, that can't control their circumstances and can't control their lives. A lot of people out there, it's not a stroke, but they have economic insecurity. They have no control over their careers or what's going on in their field. They feel weak and vulnerable and helpless. And it's a terrible feeling, and it came very personal to me as I felt it myself. So a lot of the ideas in the book, which were kind of intellectual in that chapter, suddenly were put, right in my face, and I had to deal with them and realize that what I wrote about is true in a very deep way, but that it almost sometimes takes a kind of experience in life to shake you up and make you confront that. So that's sort of what the experience was. There are other facets of it about confronting my mortality and making it very real and feeling it deep inside of me and not taking things for granted. So I could go on and on and on, but it's kind of ironic and fateful that it's my last chapter, and exactly 3 months later, I'm having to face that. It's almost as if the gods were punishing me for writing this book, or for going a little too far. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. No, that is incredible, and it's incredible. It's also amazing that your health is good now. I always say this on the show all the time to the listeners: health is the most important thing we have, and I'm really happy that you're all right and that it seems like you're recovering from it now.
Yeah, I do about 3 hours of therapy every day. I'm doing intensive amounts of work on it, but yeah, I will. I should have a full recovery, I hope.
Nice. Yeah, I know. We need more of these books, man. The last one was incredible. And
thank you.
Do you have any ideas? I know I asked you the last time you came on the show. I think you'd mentioned like a little hint of the the law of human nature coming out, and there was like a little tidbit of what you were working on. Do you have anything else that you can share with us for down the road?
Well, maybe something of what we're talking about in my experience, near-death experience, and sort of what I wrote about in that chapter about what I call the sublime. Opening yourself up to the mysterious aspect of life, to getting outside of the banality of day-to-day life and realizing the kind of weirdness of life itself and the sublime quality of simply being alive in the 21st century. I have a lot of thoughts about it. It's a book that I've been wanting to write for many years. It's a kind of a philosophy that I would be developing about how you can look at the world, almost sort of like a religious sense without a religion, kind of, just to imagine, that life began 5 billion years ago, and here we are on Skype discussing this. Don't take that kind of thing for granted. It's actually an insanely unlikely occurrence. And that is a sublime thought. And I have many, many more sublime thoughts.
Yeah. Have you ever chatted with Perry Marshall about this stuff?
I don't even know who that is. I have to.
Oh, okay, yeah. He's the guy that I forget the name of his book, The Evolution, Creationism versus Darwinism. He kind of dives into that whole thing. It's very interesting. Really, really intelligent guy.
Perry Marshall.
Yeah, you'll like him.
All right, I'll look him up.
But we had him on the show too a couple times, and we had a huge discussion about the Big Bang Theory and how unlikely the event was that we're even living right now. It's kind of a similar conversation. Super
wow.
fascinating. Yeah.
Oh, I'll check that out. Thank you very much for the reference. That's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely, man. But
I
Robert,
told you about Sam Vakman. You told me about Perry.
What's that?
Marshall. I gave you Sam Vakman, and you gave me Perry Marshall.
Good trade-off, I guess, for today. Robert, thanks again, man, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
What's a last send-off takeaway message for the audience, and then a place that our listeners can check out your latest book?
Well, the send-off is, this is a book that's going to help you understand not just yourself in a deep way, but the people around you. And although it might be a slightly painful process to come to terms with some of these negative qualities, it's actually going to free you up a lot. You're going to stop taking things personally in life. And you're going to be having a level of detachment when it comes to the social interactions, which will make it a lot easier to navigate and to control some of the darker impulses that you have. So it's a book designed to make the social realm much easier for you. The place to read about me is my original website, powerseductionandwar.com, and spelled out. So powerseductionandwar.com, and there you'll find links to Mastery, to the new book, and I think even to the book I did with 50 Cent years ago.
Okay, cool. PowerSeductionandWar.com. Robert, thanks again for coming on, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Always a pleasure. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, and go Lakers.
And lastly, before you go, just one final reminder to check out our Elite Man YouTube channel, our brand new YouTube channel that just launched last week. Subscribe to the channel right now. View all the videos, comment, and like if you can. It helps us out a ton. I promise you're going to love our channel. EliteManMagazine.com/YouTube. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. But before you go, there's one last thing I need you to do. I need you to subscribe to this podcast right now if you haven't already. By subscribing to the podcast, you get every single episode the minute they're released. Get all of our Elite Man podcast interviews with all of our incredible world-class guests from the lifestyle, health, fitness, business, and social worlds, absolutely free. Subscribe now, guys, if you haven't already, and enjoy all future episodes. And yes, if you do love the podcast, leave us an awesome review. We really do appreciate it.